Let us start off by opening Visual Studio 2022, and we're going to create a new project. We're going to be using .NET 6 for this activity, and we'll be using an API. So I'm just going to filter that list for an API project. There we go. ASP.NET Core Web API. Select that, and I'm just going to name this one Web API with Health Checks. I think that's a good enough name. And I'm going to go ahead and click next. And I'm going to be using .NET 6. I don't need any authentication type for this particular activity. And then I'm going to untick the use controllers just because I want a minimal API, but everything that we're going to be doing can be done with a regular API with controllers. So then we can hit next and create. And now that Visual Studio is open, we go to work. So the first thing that we want to do is jump down to the Program.cs file. And if you're not familiar with .NET 6, I do have courses on Udemy that walk you through development with .NET 6 from scratch. But our minimal API in .NET 6 is just showing everything that we need in one file. So typically the API would have all the controllers, and then all it would do is say use controllers as the one of the services that it would bootstrap for when the application starts. And then all of the endpoints and the actions and behaviors are all in the controllers. Now, because we unticked that option to generate the controllers, what we have is a minimal API. And if you are familiar with Node.js, if not, that's fine. But Node.js kind of has this kind of coding style where everything is one place and the action or the behavior is very, very minimal. So all we have is app.mapGet, and then you do have different methods based on the type of operation that you want to carry out. So that's map get, you can do map post, map put, etc., the different verbs. So we're saying app.mapGet, and then you have the endpoint that it can be gotten to by, and then the definition of what this should do. And that's really it. So for each endpoint that you'd want, you just kind of repeat this construct and put in, of course, the specific name and endpoint name and the behavioral code. So that's not really why we're here. I'm just giving you a little overview of what you are looking at when you look at the program.cs file of a .NET 6 web API or minimal web API. So we're going to get two packages that will allow us to initialize our health checks. So I'm going to right click on our project. I'm going to go to manage NuGet packages. And here we can see that we already have one package in the form of Swashbuckle or Swagger, and that's the documentation tool that comes pre-packaged. Well, at least if you tick that enable open API option when we were setting it up, I kind of skated over it, but that's what allows Swashbuckle to be included out of the box. So I'm going to go to browse, and we're going to look for ASP.NET Core Health Checks UI. And once we have that, we are going to get the UI and the UI.client library. So you can just go ahead and download that. Any prompts that you get, you just accept and click next. So here's one, I accept. All right, and then do the same thing for the client. So now that we have the libraries in, let's jump back over to program.cs, and I'm going to introduce a new services line to the builder. Now, the major difference between the way the code is laid out in the program.cs of a .NET 6 file versus .NET 5 is the fact that .NET 5 follows that less minimalistic C# class file pattern, where you would have the class outlined, and then you have the methods, configure services, and I think it's configure, and configure services. And then inside of that, you would have services dot, and then whatever you're adding. Now they've taken all of that away, and now we have access to the builder directly. So this builder would have been in the program.cs, and then would be doing these configurations in the startup file. Now the startup file is gone, everything is in the program.cs. We have direct access to the builder, and through the builder we can access the services option. So whatever you would have said services dot in a previous version of .NET Core, in .NET 6 you just have to say builder.services. So we're going to add a new services line. So I'm going to say builder.services, and I want to add health checks. All right. So now I'm telling it that, okay, when you're bootstrapping all your services, please add the services required for health checks. And then later on in the file, I'm going to add this new line that says app.map health checks. So this is now a middleware, right? So we build, and then after we've built, the app is initialized based on the services that we would have been building. And then the app represents the middleware or the actual application. So we can introduce middlewares to this application. So here I'm introducing a middleware app.map health checks. And then I'm saying at this endpoint, you should go to whatever construct is there to give the health checks. Now we can actually extend this, right? We can expand on this because let's see what we get first of all. So then I hit the play button, and I'm just running without debugging. If I did that quickly, let me go back. So you can run with debugging or without debugging, and that's a little faster. So it brings up the Swagger document, right? And the Swagger document basically automatically generates documentation for all of your endpoints and what the responses and requests need to look like, etc. Health check isn't here, so I can't directly test it from here because you can test the endpoints. But I do have another tool called Postman, and Postman allows me to browse to whatever endpoint I would like. So in this case, we're broadcasting at localhost, and the port is 7160. So you want to take that URL and then you put it in Postman. And if you don't have Postman, it's pretty easy to install. You can see the instructions in this video that is appearing on screen right now. So once you have that set up, you can go ahead and say localhost colon 7160 slash health check. Why slash health check? Because that is what we just configured as the endpoint that we would like. And this is a get request, which I think is default in the Postman request. And then once we click send, you're going to get back a response saying healthy. So that's good. That's a very nice bit of information. So now that we know that the API itself is alive and well, we want to turn our attention to one of the most common failure points, and that is the connection to the database. So we're going to enhance our services a bit, and we're going to add functionality that will check on the health of the database connection within our API. So we're going to go back over to NuGet, and this time I am going to go and get, I'm looking if I see it here, which I am not seeing it. So we're going to go and get ASP.NET Core Health Checks.SQL Server. I'm sure it was in the list, but let's just search for it directly so we can get it more quickly. So go ahead and install that package and accept any prompts. And then once that is done, we jump back over to Program.cs, and then we're going to start extending this. So we can now chain on and add SQL Server. There we go. And then we're going to have to specify where the connection string is coming from. So usually we would have the connection string in our app settings.json file. So I'm going to put that section here, right? So right above logging, we're going to create a new line, and then you see it's auto-completing connection strings for me. And then I'm just going to give it test connection. So this, even though I'm calling it test connection, this would actually represent your connection to a database. And our connection string is going to say server is equal to, I am going to just use my local host server. So I have SQL Developer Edition installed on my machine, so I can get to it via local host. You might not necessarily have that same server on your machine, but whatever the server name is, meaning when you're connecting to it through the management studio, that is the address you want to put there. So it could be ./SQL Express. If you have to use the slashes, then you use more than one slashes, right? Because you can't use one slash in this construct. In this JSON file, you have to use two. If it is that you want to test using the local DB that came with your Visual Studio, it could be local DB. and then 2 slashes again, MS SQL local DB, right? So it's not hard and fast with server, but in reality, this server would actually represent the server that the database is on, which might not necessarily be the same machine as the API or the application that you are doing the health checks for, which is why this health check is a very important part of the whole construct of having an application. So for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use the built-in database that comes with Visual Studio. So that way we're all on the same page. Once you're using Visual Studio, you will have this. And then I'm going to say semicolon, and then database is equal to, which database do I have? So I'm sorry, I'm going to check which database I have and see if I need to go and create a new one. So to get to the databases in the local DB quite quickly, you can just go ahead, hit view, and jump over to the SQL Server Object Explorer, which will launch a new pane. And this new pane allows you to interrogate this very server that comes built into Visual Studio. So I have a number of databases, some from private operations, some from educational stuff. What I'm going to do is use my Hangfire database. I'm just going to choose a database that is easy enough to remember. So Hangfire, and then the last few parts of the connection string would usually be like security and access rights to allow multiple connections at a time. So I'm not going to go into all of that. I'm just doing the bare minimum so we can get a connection string up and running. So here, I need to tell it which SQL server, here it is, it's asking for the connection string. So once we have the connection string in our app settings.json file, I can go to builder.configuration, and then I can get connection string and then provide that method with the name of the connection string that I want. So that's test connection, that's what I called it. So I know I'm trying to get test connection here. So essentially what this does is whenever it's doing a health check against the database that can be found at this location, it does a very simple low-key query just to make sure that it gets something back. And if it does, then it says, okay, yes, it is healthy, right? So let's give this a little test. I'm going to run without debugging mode, and then I'm going to bring up Postman, and we're going to do another health check. And when I do that, I see it's healthy. All right. So let us say peradventure the database server went down, right? Or it just couldn't get to the database for whatever reason. And I'm going to simulate that by changing the name of the database in the configuration. So I don't have a database called Hangfire 11, but let us simulate that the database connection, the database could not be reached, right? So hit the fireball for a hot reload, and then I'm going to go ahead and send. Oh, I'm sorry, no, I have to restart the application. Let's do that instead. And then I'm going to send another health check probe, and then I'm getting unhealthy, right? So now the health check is saying that, hey, there's something wrong with the database connection. I mean, we know we just did that, but in a real situation, that is the same concept. It tried to run the query against the database that's in the connection string. It couldn't get to it. And so we know that the health has changed. It's no longer a healthy connection. So that is a good way to always check and see that your connections are up and running. All right, guys. So next up, we're going to look at creating a user interface to help us with this kind of checking. So let's jump back over to NuGet. And this time we're going to be looking for ASP.NET Core.HealthChecks.UI.InMemory.Storage. Kind of a mouthful, but let's go. So we're going to just go ahead and install that package. As usual, accepting any prompts along the way. And then we're going to jump back over to our program.cs, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new builder.services line. There we go. So builder.services dot add health checks UI, and then I'm going to let it know that I want to add in-memory storage. So that that will just be loaded into memory whenever the API is loaded. So we have that UI, and then I need a middleware for this also. So I'm just going to come down and say app.map health. There we go. App.map health checks UI. So now with those configured, I need to jump over to my app settings and put in some settings here to govern all of that. So I'm going to create a new section, and this one I'm going to call Health Checks UI. And then we say colon, and then we start up a new object block. And then in this object block, I have a new key or section that's going to be called Health Checks colon, and then this is going to be an array, and this array takes objects. So if you're familiar with JSON, you would understand all of that. If not, then what happens is that whenever you see the curly brace, that means you're defining an object, right? And an object can have multiple key value pairs. But then when you have an array, it means you have a collection of a particular type. So I have an array here, and then this is an object. So I could actually have multiple object constructs within the square brackets, pretty much. So all I have to do is open and close curly braces and then comma separate. So I only have one, but the construct allows for multiple, which is why we have to start off with the square braces or square brackets. So this one, I'm going to give it a name. So name is the key, and then I'm just going to say health checks dashboard. And then the URI would be how do I get to it? So I could say that I want to get to it to the same URI that I'm using here, which could be health check. I could also just say health check UI. I think I'm just going to say health check UI, right? So the URI, and that should have a forward slash. So forward slash health check UI. So browse there and bring up our health check. And then we have one more configuration to go in after the array or the square brackets, and that is evaluation time in seconds. And I'm just going to say 5 seconds. All right. Actually, sorry, let me make a correction here. So what happens is that the dashboard is actually hitting the URI. I apologize. So this is not the URI that we should go to see the dashboard. This is me telling the dashboard which URI it should use for its information. Right. So health check is our URI for the health check information, and then the UI will have its own URI or its own URL that comes by default, right? So the evaluation time in seconds is pretty much how frequently we will poll this URI for information on the health of the system. So based on your SLAs and your objectives, that could be 5 seconds, it could be 1 second, though I probably wouldn't suggest that. It could be 15 seconds, it could be every hour. It doesn't, it varies based on your system and your capabilities. So with all of that done, let us run once again in without debugging. And this time, yes, we have the Swagger UI coming up, but I also should be able to just take out that Swagger URL and say health check hyphen UI, or is that checks? That should be checks. There we go. So health checks hyphen UI, and look at this. So without writing too much code, we're able to get this health check dashboard, and I can expand and I can see here that it is telling me that there, this UI, this API is unhealthy. And that is probably because we had some configuration issue. So let's jump back over to our program.cs, and the configuration issue is right here in line 45. So we need to let this URI know that when it responds, it should respond with something that the UI can understand. So I'm going to say comma and add a new instance of health check options. When you type this, you may need to do a control dot include missing using references. And then I'm initializing it with the new brackets or curly braces, and then we are going to put in a response writer, make it equal to UI response writer dot write health check UI response. So this now will format it in a way that our dashboard can understand. So after you put that in, if you reload the dashboard, then you should now see everything is healthy and it's polling every 5 seconds. And you can see it's telling you the last execution each time. So this would be a good health check dashboard to put up on a big screen in the office where everybody needs to make sure that things are working properly. So that's all from me for this tutorial. I thank you for joining me and I hope you learned something new. And you can go ahead and research and see all the things that you can do and how you can use this particular feature set to the best of your ability. Do remember to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. And thank you once again for watching and thank you for the support.